Welcome to Three Devs and a Maybe, the podcast series for beginner web developers and general web enthusiasts. Now, introducing your show hosts, Michael Budd, Fraser Hart, Lewis Keynes, and Ed Mann.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Three Devs and a Maybe. My name's Ed Mann, and today it's a two-man pod again with my good friend, Mr. Michael Budd. How are we doing, Mickey?
Hello. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. And you?
I am very, 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 very good. Thank you very much for asking. That was a bit of a weird entrance, wasn't it? How are things going, though, man? How's things going this week?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm full of a cold, which is always nice, but
Just in time for Christmas. Hopefully get it away. The idea is to get it done now before Christmas comes.
To be fair, I've got like 2 weeks, right? So should be okay. It has to be a pretty bad cold to last that long. So yeah,
you should not have said that. You should not. Yeah, we've got audio. Yeah, exactly. We've got audio proof now.
Yeah.
Set in stone.
But yeah, no, this week has been good because I handed in my masters the other day.
Wait. Hang on. Oh, I've got a drum, and I've got a.
Oh wow!
Yeah, sorry. That'll be the only time we use these sound effects
for this particular show, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's going to have to be a thing now. Now we've actually invested in Zencastr. I should say that to the audience. Yeah, we are on the Zencastr bandwagon now, so we've invested in it. We've now got a subscription. So yes.
Can you imagine
be prepared for so many sound effects now each episode?
If Lou had control of those sound effects,
I would be scared for my ears.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. But yeah, no, really, that's just amazing getting that out of the way. It's so weird now to get back in the evening and be like, I don't actually have to do anything. And
you say you could play like games or something. You're like, I'm going to play on the Xbox.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a big gamer, but last night I was like, well, might as well play it for half an hour. I've not done that in over 4 years. Serious.
Down frag some people, some noobs.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, that's pretty awesome. I just now scared to death of what will actually happen with it. I don't think it's good enough to pass, to be honest with you, but yeah, I don't know what I could do.
Ever the optimist, Mickey B.
Yeah, well, I'm perhaps maybe a little bit too self-critical, but it isn't good. You know, I know it's not. So.
It isn't good. But I mean, so from the last time we spoke, from last week, has there been any progress with it? Obviously you had to write the dissertation. Was there anything from those findings that you haven't been able to find on the show yet? It's
really annoying. I did find a few sort of like bugs, but it's just too late to do anything weird because I already handed in the code. So, but I was able to write about it. But then it's just like maybe you didn't test your code properly, so it's swings and roundabouts. But no, I mean, at the end of the day, like when I look at the marking criteria, it says that to pass you need to have done a reasonable attempt at it, and I think I did actually. I don't think there's anything wrong with the way that I tried to tackle it. And actually, before one of the things I was thinking is, the most common approach to this kind of thing is ordinal regression and then using decision trees to find out.
What the hell is that?
I don't think I could answer that question well enough for this show, but basically, so have you played much with decision trees before? Like an idea of how they sort of work?
No.
So basically, and this is going to be a really poor explanation. I wasn't prepared for this, but basically, like when you think like you've got your different like branches, your nodes on a decision tree. Sorry for
is that like a yes/no answer or something? So okay,
sort of, yeah. But basically, the way it does it, well, one of the ways it does it is through entropy. And there's a guy who's a really famous, and I can't think what his name is, but I'll try and put it in the show notes afterwards. But basically, he made up this equation, this entropy equation, that basically calculates information gain from a particular attribute type. So the way that the decision tree will work is it will say, well, what is giving the most information gain at this point? So you can like kind of disregard some of the stuff that's just irrelevant, and the way it will then it'll work out what the most important thing is, and then it creates a new data set, and you keep going down. Obviously, the first thing it will do is try and say, well, look, none of these ever get to anything, so put them aside, and then use the things that are most important and stem off from them. That was a really poor answer, but hopefully I'll get the equation and we'll put it in the show notes. But yeah, so I really can't remember where I was going with this, but yeah, so that's the most popular way of doing it, I think, is what I was going to say. For that kind of problem, which is like a ranking problem,
So how would that work then? So you'd make a decision tree based of your results or based on the criteria you want?
Yeah, I mean, for a decision tree to work, you need a data set and you need to know what the classifications are for like each, sort of set in your data set. So you need to know what those classifications are, and then it will tell you what it thinks the most important things are within those to get to those classification points. So, so I created my own data sets from my data and put it through this program called Weka, which is basically a machine learning application that gives you access to loads of different algorithms. It's really good if you're into that kind of thing. So I did use that just to see what happened, and that is the most popular way of doing it. I think it's called, in machine learning terms, it's called learning to rank. That's what you would call like this kind of problem. So, but that said, like when I was doing more research, genetic algorithms are an acceptable way of doing it, because the beautiful thing about genetic algorithms are that they're very much geared up to the idea that you really don't have a lot to go off. You're really letting the genetic algorithm do the work. And in fact, one of the papers that I read said that, some people can get really obsessed with your fitness function. So for every like iteration, every mutation that you do, obviously you want to find out how fit your results are. And he says, one of the authors said, spend less time on the fitness function, because really, okay, yeah, your genetic algorithm might take longer, but there's other things you can do really. If it's set up right, then the machine learning will do the task for you. The genetic algorithm will do the task for you. So I don't think, whilst I chose genetic algorithm because that's just what I was interested in, I don't think it was a bad choice for that particular task. I really think my downfall was the lack of data that I could get my hands on. I honestly think engagement was probably a huge factor, and the last chapter of my paper really was, how you would take the project forward. And I think the way to do that would be is if you could access sort of the engagement figures for each site, you'd have to have a lot of buy-in from end users and get data that way. And I think you probably could get more information from that. But yeah, I think I made a reasonable attempt at it, to be honest with you. And of course, things I would change, but speak to anyone who's done like this kind of final project, and there's loads of people who say they never really succeeded in what they were trying to do. So it's really more the way that you applied yourself to the task, I think. So yeah, it's in the hands of the gods now, really. So
the marking gods.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It sounds really cool though, man, and I'll definitely need those in the show notes. For the show notes, there's links, because I'll have to be looking into that. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I'm really annoyed I can't remember the...
No, dude. Hey, you're finished now. You're free.
Yes.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, it feels amazing. It really, really does. Yeah. So how about you? What have you been up to?
Well, I haven't finished a master's dissertation, so sorry about that, audience. Not as interesting, I'm afraid.
Disgusting.
I have had some interesting bits that come up at work, actually, though, that I would love to talk to you and the audience all about. It's actually talk to you, but then talk at the audience. It's not very nice, is it, really?
It's a bit rude, really.
It is very rude, yeah. But yeah, so the first one was... Well, so last week I did a couple of deploys, some early morning deploys, just to get some bits done. So we upgraded Kong, cool, all happened, all good there. Moved over to Postgres on that was okay. And then I made a change, kind of a very, not naive change, but very much like, oh yeah, that's all right. I'll just add a column in the table, in a Postgres table, and I'll just update the column because I need to get prehistoric data, essentially. So notified that. So I was like, yeah, just set all those to what the email was sent at. So we're splitting it up. So we have email sent out and we have push notification essentially sent at fields in the table. And I was like, yeah, okay, well, for previous ones, let's just set all their email sent at, let's set all their push notifications to the ones that the email was sent at. And yeah, that seems fine on a very small data set. And then you get to one of our data sets, which in live and also in actual, to be fair, in development, because we use just a clone of the production ones, we get real results. It was taking a long time. And in fact, it would have taken like 6 hours of locking, because this table is huge. And it was really interesting, actually, because trying to resolve it. So not only was the fact of thinking, okay, well, I can't just do an update. So if I did this update and I set that to that, it would lock the table and no one would be able to use it. okay, so what we'll do then is we'll go through and we'll slowly, do smaller locking, essentially, where it's like, okay, we'll update in this range, then update in this range, and then slowly build it up. And I was tackling that on the day, so slowly, doing that, and then noticed that Datadog comes along and says, hang on a minute, you're using quite a lot more memory now. There's a lack of hard drive space. And I was thinking, oh, that's a bit weird. And I looked, and it was like, whoa. And what actually happened is the data set had ballooned to almost double the size on live, the actual table, along with the indexes. And speaking to Gavin, who's very good with Postgres, a lot of experience with it, and he really loves it. He's the one that got me, actually switched over to Postgres. Yeah. But yeah, speaking to him and kind of understanding how it works, it just blew my mind. So I think we definitely need to get Bruce back on the show to discuss it. But essentially, from my layman's terms of what really happened. So what happens is we've got that idea of the MVVC, which is the whole idea that I can be writing something while you're reading it and things like that. And it helps a lot with transactional stuff and keeping things, with concurrent things wanting to happen, etc. Essentially, to do that and to do an update, instead of an update actually replacing it, it actually does a full-on copy of it. So, it's because it's the version that you've got. Because, in a snapshot, you're saying, I'm looking at things. So when I'm in this transaction, I'm saying, I'm looking at things at that version. And then someone else may have updated, to a new version up past it and stuff. But you're still looking at that same snapshot of what you already had. So you can't just update things willy-nilly. You have to say, all right, well, I've got this updated version. And now you set the pointer essentially to that. This is the newest version. So you can see what's happening there. It's an append-only thing. It's an append-only list, essentially, append-only data structure as opposed to an actual a mutable replacement. So anytime I did update, it was, of course, incurring space penalties. And, the same thing with indexes. Indexes as well, they're having lots of dead nodes. You'd have to just recreate it and also recreate it with the new one as well. So there's a couple of ways of getting around this. So the first way and the best way would be to say, okay, then we'll do this massive operation and then we'll do a vacuum full. And essentially that recreates the whole table. So because of what happens and the way that it stores blocks, Postgres is storing, it stores an 8 kilobit blocks, or pages essentially. It will try and fit as much as it can in those blocks for each of the records. So you may be able to get a couple of records in there. But once it can't do that, it then needs to go to another page. So sometimes you're very lucky and you're like, actually, this row can actually just go in with this page as well. So you can just, add it to what you already have, essentially. But typically what you'll find is you'll have to add it to the end, especially if you don't mess around with what they call the fill factor. And the fill factor is that how much of this block do I want to actually use, or this page, do I want to use before I go on to a next one? So in a table which is going to be updated a lot, you really want to actually say around, guesstimate of how much you want. I'm sure there are like kind of, like mathematics, like formulas and stuff to work this out. But we've kind of gone with at the moment 95%. And you say, all right, I want to use about 95% of this before I go on to the next page, before I, go on to actually add more records in another page, because it allows me then, after the fact, if I do want to update one of them, it may hopefully be able to just add it to that row as opposed to creating a new page, etc., and add it to the end. But yeah, so the good way of doing this, the best way would be vacuum full. Trouble with that is it creates a whole brand new table, and essentially, it's defragging it. Essentially, it's putting it all in order. It's all nice. Everything's continuous, and it's how it should be. It's brilliant, but it locks the whole table. So you then go into, you've got this kind of catch, haven't you? Where it's like, okay, well, I want to do a vacuum full pretty much because I want to gain some space back, but I also don't want it to be locking because I want people to be able to use this table. What can you do? So I was stumped by it, I'll be honest. I was thinking, so fortunately, we're able to remove one of the indexes. You can actually do a re-index, and that would have removed the, lowest, reduces the size of the index because there's a lot of empty nodes that it doesn't need to worry about anymore. But yeah, so Gavin pointed me in the direction of PG Toolkit, and in particular PG Compact. And there were some really interesting blog posts that I won't try and explain on this podcast because I don't even think I've explained that well enough. But I'll put in the show notes, and it is amazing and awesome. And essentially what it allows you to do is something called, they call it a vacuum full light, which essentially is I do minimum amount of locking as possible, but it will give you back most of the vacuum full gains, which is, being able to gain space back. I will put it in the show notes. I'll leave it at that because I don't know whether I've explained it at all right. But I definitely think we should get someone clever on the show to talk about that at some point, because it really was amazing stuff. And it's that whole thing where, you treat the database as a black box again, and you're like, yeah, just updating, and you realize, hang on, what's happening here? And then you realize that, understandably what actually needs to happen in the database for you to get the gains of like an MVVC architecture. And then, it's amazing. And then there's all thing called Toast, which is pages that can't fit on 2 pages on a single page. So it has to be over to multiple pages. And it's very interesting stuff. But we took us a couple of days to run that over this table. And we were able to get about 15 gig back of space, which was quite nice. Wow. And that was, because of these updates I was doing. So updates aren't free. I think that's where I've learned from, is that an update and even a delete isn't free, really, because of this append-only nature. And you really have to take into consideration. And it is really interesting, actually, where we look at, say, a dev database. So a dev database is a snapshot, a dump of an old snapshot of the live database. But when you run that and you actually apply that and you set it up on dev, you'll notice that the sizes of indexes and the sizes of the actual tables are a lot smaller than the ones on live. And that's because the live one has been changed throughout time as opposed to these snapshots. So it's a really interesting topic. And I'll put it in the show notes, those bits, and hopefully we'll try and get someone a bit cleverer to talk about all that at some point.
Definitely.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Very interesting.
Quite stressful.
And another actual... Pardon?
Quite stressful, though.
Yes, I'm not going to lie. That was probably one of the stressful... It was a stressful time doing these changes and then that happening. And fortunately, Gavin was there, and it was just like, this is a very strange thing. And the locking is scary as anything, because, you do something and it starts locking the table. You're like, no, we better not do that. That's not going to be good. And it's trying to tame and understand the characteristics of a big database. Yeah. And this is a powerful database. This is a powerful server we're running it on. So, it was a huge data table to be handling. But and it's historical data, and you have to, you get it. This is the thing where you have to take into consideration that, and it's not just these small tables that you can easily, lock for ages or do whatever you want with and handle in a couple of seconds. It's, hours work.
Yeah.
And another interesting little bug that came up this last week, was to do with, and I think I remember years ago on the podcast talking about it. It was Unicode stuff. I'm sure I did a couple of blog posts on it, and discuss Unicode and, multi-bytes, strings and characters set, and how they work and stuff. And again, there's been some really good resources online discussing it, and I'll put them in the show notes. This was specifically to do with, and actually, I think this happens quite a lot, right? So validation. So obviously you have client-side validation and you have server-side validation. Yeah. And a typical thing to do is have, say, a length of a string. So you're saying, I want the length of the string to not be, let's take the Twitter example, over 140 characters. So anything over 140 characters, it needs to be 140 characters or less. So we'll have it on the client side, and then we'll have it on the server side. And the client side's nice because they won't have to do a full page, round trip to the server just for them to be declined and say, sorry, your tweet isn't good enough, or it isn't short enough for me. And I mean, I'm sure this is what you must do as well. All these typical applications kind of this server, client side validations rules.
Yeah.
So that seems pretty trivial. And how would you go about then doing, string validation, string length in JavaScript?
To be honest with you, I'm trying to think now. Can you just do length on it? Length?
Yep. So this is what you do. Is naively you'll be like, okay, so I'll do right. So let's do the naive versions on both. So we'll do JavaScript length on a field, and then we'll do a string length strlen on the post on whatever content comes in the server.
Yeah.
Now both of those actually represent characters lengths in different sequences. So a JavaScript implementation of a length or a byte. So length is actually a byte. Or how many code points? I suppose length actually is in JavaScript. What it's saying is it's saying I need
an array of chars, right?
It is an array of chars, but then what is it? What is a char? Is the problem because so in PHP, it's just 8 bits in a byte, so it's a byte. So each byte is counted up. but in JavaScript, it's 16-bit or 16 bits per character or per, kind of code point it can use.
Yeah.
So what that means then is for every one on JavaScript that it thinks is 1, actually it's 2 on PHP side.
Oh, right.
Because you can see that, can't you? Where and that's the problem with it. Like, so, and what the other problem is to say in PHP, what we did was like, okay, then, well, we encode everything in Unicode 8. We, submit it in Unicode 8, and then we use, use MB strlen, and we're able to work it out correctly that side. Perfect. That sounds cool. You then get the problem still on the JavaScript side, because, so say in the case of emoji, so an emoji is, how would you deem emoji? I guess I would say it's the length of 1. It's 1 character. But JavaScript thinks it's 2, because actually it's something called a surrogate pair, which is it requires 2 different byte or 2, 16-bit numbers to represent it, or code points to represent it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it gets a little bit annoying there. You're like, okay, it's 2 there, and then I go into MB strlen, and I'm able to do it, and it goes 1. So it's trying to unify these. And I found really good blog posts, actually. Matthias Beinens, he's done loads of work with JavaScript emojis and things like that. And it's one of his mantras is stick a emoji poo in like, one of your tests just to see if it breaks. Because it's just one of those funny ones where and I say, essentially what you're trying to do is you're making sure that you can handle all these characters, because if I put an emoji in, if I allow an emoji, it should be a length both on, server and client side should be the same, because that's, how the validation should work. But yeah, so we were turning out, sorry, it was kind of diverging there. But yeah, so that was the problem that we were having where, the strings weren't represented correctly in both. They're being represented correctly on PHP side now, because we've been, dealing with it that way. But what we need to do with JavaScript was we didn't really want, you can use things called like Unicode and stuff, which allows you then to deal with it on the client side. But we didn't really want the heavyweight use of that. So we ended up just using a nice little bit of script, actually, that, again, Matthias did, which essentially what it does is it replaces any character sequence or any character, that's outside of the BMP, which is essentially the representation that can be done in 16 bits. Of a code, like a character that can be represented in 16 bits, a single 16-bit. And it replaces that with just like an underscore or an ASCII character, or, a character that can be represented in BMP. And what that allows us to do then is be able to do like a length on it, and it correctly works out what the lengths are, which is happy days. But yeah, it was one of those funny ones where it can bite you so much. I mean, character encodings is one of those mysteries still to me in some regard, with like all the different ways you can do it and stuff. And yeah, it's really interesting. And another actual thing to do with that, and this actually really was kind of like the parent to the problem of what we were actually having with the emoji stuff and all the character encoding, was that if I did an enter, so back in the day, when computers were young and all this, and actually when computers didn't exist and you had the idea of a typewriter, you had the idea of carriage return new line. So you have -r, -n.
Yeah.
So you can actually represent, though, new lines in a couple of ways. You can represent them as -r, you can represent them as -n, or you can represent them as -rn, -r, -n. And so you can represent them in 2, or 1 byte or character representation, however you want to think of it. And obviously you can actually do it with Unicode now as well, which is even crazier. But essentially what could happen then is if I did a new line or in one browser or on one operating system, it would be coming up as 2 characters, because it's doing 2, a sequence to return, do a new line is 2 as opposed to 1. And again, it's working out and unifying that to make, because again in PHP, it was saying, yeah, it's fine, it's a 1, but actually in the browser, it was saying it's 2, etc. So we had a lot of interesting bits to do with that. But I'm thinking there's definitely a blog post in there to discuss kind of the joining of how to deal with new lines and how to deal with Unicode supporting, kind of characters outside the BMP that, you deal with it and handle lengths in a more succinct manner.
Wow, I had no idea.
This is the trouble, isn't it? Until you go into it and you go down the rabbit hole, you don't realize how crazy it really is. And I really it would point you in the direction of this guy's blog, because he discusses it in so much length, but he explains it in such a good way. But I do find sometimes what happens is I read it, I get it, I solve a problem, or I'm, in my headspace, I'm in the headspace for it, and then I'll come back to it and I'll be completely lost again until I have to reread things again. So it's one of those things where you're just like, always use MB strlen, and always, remember the fact of, the BMP, and remember how, certain characters are in certain planes and they require, like UTF, how many bytes it really requires and things like this. And and I think that's the trouble with JavaScript, because it uses a 16-bit or 2 8-bits essentially sequence, as opposed to what, like say a PHP would do, which is just bytes. And this is what C did really, which was just a byte processor. It's dealing with each byte as opposed to a code point, which is an actual single entity. But yeah, mine was blown. I'm not gonna lie. Those 2 problems last week were just like, wow, okay, this has been an interesting week. Got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, sounds it.
And another thing, actually, and actually this is something you mentioned ages ago, testing time-dependent actions or testing time-dependent functions.
Yeah.
You mentioned to me, you were saying like, how do you do that? And it's very hard to simulate, obviously, a real time, because you need the real time to be there. And, I don't know, did we ever speak about it? I don't think we ever spoke about it, did we?
No. Not that I remember.
Have you got an example of one of the time-dependent tasks you were thinking of when you were trying to?
So I think it was like running daily automated reports, and I think I was just basically hacking the current time, basically just literally sort of hard coding something in, say this is the time, and doing it that way. But obviously, then that's okay. You can. I don't know. I'm not explaining this very well, but I remember at the time thinking it could have been a nicer way of doing that somehow. Did that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So essentially, it's one of those things where you're dealing with something that is, it's kind of external to you. It's a global state variable, essentially, isn't it? And it's bad, it's tainted, because you can't really mock it, because it's something that's out of your control. And there was a couple of ways that over the years I've kind of thought about it and changed it. So, there's a couple. The simplest way would be supplying the current date time. So every time that you want to do it, you have an action. You say, okay, then here's the current date time. You do your work with it, and that allows you, obviously, at the highest level, then to say, okay, this is the current date time. Whenever you're running that method, provide it with the current date time, and it allows it to decide what it wants to do. So when you're essentially bootstrapping your code for the command, you would supply the date time each time you want to invoke it. That makes testing it really easy, because obviously you can just provide it with stub date times that you want. Fine, cool. That's one way of getting around it. If you want to still maintain and kind of the amount of the actual work you want to do with that time, if you want that to be kind of incorporated in the service itself, if in some regard, so it's a dependency of it, you can kind of abstract out the concept of time as well. So you could have this idea of like a clock interface, where you implement the clock interface, and the default one is the real one, whatever you want it to be, and it allows you to pass that in and saying, okay, this is the current clock interface, and then it kind of inverts that, where you don't have to deal with it every time upon each invocation. You're not providing it with the date time each invocation, and it keeps it within the service. So if you want to give it to someone else to use, but it also then gives you the ability to, when you're in the testing phase, to be able to stub or spy. Well, however, what you actually want to do. Probably best thing would be saying stub actually. So you want to stub out the clock, with the exact time that you want to test and see, simulate in the real world there. Actually, and those were the first 2 that I kind of did and thought of. And then there's 2 actually new ones. So with with Joe's work on UOps, actually what you could do as well is you can actually override, and this is a bit scary. This is kind of like the monkey patching thing in Ruby, where that's what they would do. So obviously we have these hard coded new date time. That's how we do it, or date create, or whatever we do within the class that creates this new time. And that's the problem, because we're creating it within the class, so we have no idea of how to, we had no way of injecting it. So the first 2 ways of mine was injecting it through either a parameter or injecting it through a construct, and it generates it using that service. So what you could do instead is you could actually say, UOps, go and override the implementation, essentially monkey patch the date time, and return this instead. Now that allows you to not have to worry about the design at all. It doesn't change the design at all, but it also gives you the flexibility of being able to actually test it correctly, because you're still able to do what you want to do. but it does kind of impede on, what you're essentially doing is overriding things that you probably shouldn't be overriding. I think, some of the things Joe was thinking of when he invented UOps was the idea of being able to override stuff in legacy code, such as like exits and stuff, because these are things you couldn't deal with and it would just crash your test suite. So I would be a bit cautious about that. A newer one, and this is if you're in the Carbon world, so if you're into like the Carbon abstraction on top of datetime, as you can actually, and they've provided it essentially is with a set time now. So you're able to set the time. So if you pass around Carbon objects and you're happy in your domain doing that, you can then set the time now, and then obviously that will do a similar thing essentially where it's the abstraction on top of datetime, which is allowing you to say, okay, well actually I'm just separating this out and I actually want this to be this instead. So when Carbon wants to get it, it's able to get the actual one you want. And those are kind of, so those are like 3 different ways of doing it. And I'm interested to see what's your opinion on these? Like, what one would you kind of lean towards?
I remember you recommending Carbon to me, to be honest with you. I think originally when I was speaking to you about this, you said Carbon, but I've never really had a chance to try either of them. So, but from what you just said, maybe, probably Carbon, to be honest with you. It's
interesting because I don't know, like for me actually now, it's changing your design and having like a clock interface just for the fact of testing, it always comes up, and this discussion always does come up. It's like, are you changing your design just to make testing easier as opposed to actually making the design better for the fact of, making the code better? Sometimes, tests do aid and create better design, but in this case, maybe you are just creating it for the sake of creating it to make it easier to test. I don't, I very much, I'm of the ilk now where I like pure functions and I like things where it's easier for me to understand at a function level. So say I have a class and then I pass in the current time. So it allows me to explicitly see, okay, this is what's happening, as opposed to really what's happening with the clock interfaces. It's a couple of levels up, a bit more in direction where you're saying, oh yeah, actually I'm creating this new instance of this and things like that. And it's passing in the interface, which is the mock is essentially, or the stub, sorry. So I think I would maybe lean towards more the parameter because it's explicitly at the time of invocation. You're saying exactly when it is, so you know what it is. But these ways, they're all trying to do the same thing, trying to make test doubles out of time. But it's a really interesting, kind of discussion. And it'd be awesome to see what the audience think about what they feel.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome.
One thing I was using this week, I think I told you a little bit about it before, but so the project I'm working for at the moment for my my client, he obviously has a separate CRM system. So I've kind of been putting this bit off for a little while using Microsoft Dynamics.
How is that?
Obviously, I don't like it, to be honest with you. I honestly don't feel I've ever played with a CRM that I could say I liked.
That is the problem, isn't it?
there's so many of them out there because most companies need a CRM system. And there's a lot of money there. Like, all the people I know, all the organizations I've worked for, pay for CRM systems. They're really expensive, So when you pay that kind of money, you expect something good. And I didn't like it, to be honest with you. And I don't know if this was just a bug on my end, but it renders completely different for me on Mac to what it does on Windows.
Lovely. That's a great.
I don't really understand that, because if it's in the browser, right, it should render the same way.
You would hope so. Obviously, they think then that they can sniff based on the OS and they want to make a different experience. Is that based on also in Chrome? And so the Chrome version of a Chrome Mac version is different to the Chrome Windows version.
So that must be it then. Yeah, because I was using it on Chrome. Yeah, but in Chrome you got on Mac you got a really kind of reduced kind of version of it. Really, basically, graphically it looks awful. Maybe it was just an issue, a bug or something. But yeah, it was not nice. But then trying to integrate with it was made a lot easier, thankfully, because of the amount of good people out there who do open source contributions, and I was able to find a composer package. I think it was PHP CRM toolkit, and that made it a lot easier. So
what is the CRM doing then? What do you actually need to interact with?
Well, essentially, for my client, whenever we get a new subscriber who signs up for a trial, so I'll obviously store them in our system, and then basically he wants it then he
wants to relay it to them.
System,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I tried putting it in a queue task because it's not particularly fast doing that either. but also it was just I don't know. I thought it was a bit nasty, to be honest with you. But I'd like to find a really nice PHP CRM actually with really nice kind of API. That'd be fantastic, and then maybe go that way. But yeah, that wasn't fun. I mean, do you use a CRM at your place or not, or in-house company?
So we use Desk. I don't know whether that's a CRM though. I mean, I suppose it is, because it's kind of like, dealing with customers and things, like kind of tool. Yeah. So I think Desk is probably what we, and we kind of interact with that through, they have like email hooks to be able to send new customers in and things like that. And I think they even have the API and stuff. So it's not terrible.
That sounds better. Yeah.
Well, but then you say they're all kind of very similar in what they do, aren't they? Or not really what they do. I suppose it's like how they hook in. But their main goal is to get as much information in and then keep you in their product. So, yeah, they're kind of, maybe it's great for them to import stuff, but exporting things maybe a ball ache or something like that. I don't know.
So here's another one for you. And this is like something I feel like hasn't changed in like 500 years, but the old sending emails. And obviously, I'm still doing it. I'm correct in saying that still the best way is doing it is in tables, right? If not the only way of doing it, pretty much.
You mean designing emails?
Yeah.
Oh man, I haven't done that in years. But yeah, I think there's some couple of really good like boilerplates, aren't there, online to do with dealing with it. But I think you may be right. Like, to deal with the whole generic handling every different type of email client, which is like the dreaded thing you could ever want to do, you would have to kind of deal with it at the base case. I know that Laravel actually in 5.4, I know Taylor's been speaking about that. He's been making kind of a nicer API for dealing with, a nicer interface to deal with this mail and like handling mail and stuff and handling emails and presenting mail and stuff like that. But I'll put that in the show notes as well. So it would be, maybe check that out for sure. Definitely check that out. See if that makes, because I think this is the thing. Like, he's also got this idea of templates and things like that. So it may be right up, maybe perfect timing for what you're doing. Actually, if you're dealing with having to deal with emails and dealing with, I mean, this is where it's just like a simple email is. I know people want the Freddy emails and the nice things, but sometimes just a plain text email is so much easier and actually works compared to these other ones.
Well, it's a real minefield, because I was talking to a friend the other day, and he's more in marketing, but they send out emails to millions of people, and they found that a bounce rate had just gone up a huge amount.
So bounce rate is people don't or it's people get spammed or something.
It wasn't bounce rate. This was emails going into junk, basically, so they weren't even seeing them.
Yeah.
And
well, that's because they're probably our junk, but no.
This turned out to be that they had an error in the HTML.
Really? People weren't like, interesting.
They fixed the HTML, all validated, and then because I think I'm like you, really, I'm a little bit, not a cowboy, but I don't really concentrate on if my HTML validates anymore. I
don't think anyone. Yeah. I mean, the trouble with HTML5 is that it kind of went the other way, where although it was valid HTML, it didn't feel like XHTML, so people weren't, and the whole concept of everyone wasn't like, oh, look at me, I've got my little tick which is telling I'm a valid. People don't do that anymore because browsers are probably more susceptible, and the trouble is that they handle it. I think we kind of went through. We want to be really strict. We were like really relaxed, then we're really strict, and now we're kind of going back more relaxed. But obviously,
I feel like emails has not followed the same trend. It's stuck. Yeah. It hasn't evolved at all in my mind.
No, completely not. Absolutely not. Yeah. And I think that's unfortunately one of those things. So is that what you're tackling at the moment then? Emails.
I am, I mean, I literally kind of like put aside one day to do sign up process, and
how long you been?
Well, I'm 2 days now, really, because there's so much to it, and you're just making sure you do it right. And I don't know. I mean, I put in Google Capture, which was really nice. That was effortless, actually, really fantastic. But your activation links, that kind of stuff, and then all your emails sending off to people, the CRM integration. And obviously, this is the bit where you really don't want your code to fail, right? Because if people never sign up, then you can't even get any further.
Yeah, you definitely want the introduction to be as seamless as possible.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot going on there. And I'm using transactions to make sure that certain things you really do all work together and must complete. Just lots of little pitfalls, really. It's a funny one, isn't it? I mean, like back in the day, I probably wouldn't have spent an awful lot of time on sign up. I'd probably been like, oh, into user table, off you go, done. But now I kind of think of things more, sophisticated sounds more a bit over the top, but I do think of things more about, how it will all work, and
it's a bigger picture, isn't it? It's
more of a design process for sure. Yeah.
Some of its parts, like you have to kind of have a macro and micro level quite a lot of the time, going in and out, kind of seeing like the small bits of like, okay, this tiny little query is doing this, etc. Like, can I shave a bit of performance out of this little query here? Okay, now I need to look at the big picture, and how do people? What's the story like of an actual user just coming in and trying to sign up? And how about the story of a user that has signed up or hasn't signed up or is partially signed up? And you have to think of all these things. And they say if you're a one-man band, you've got to be thinking of these things all the time. And I think there's a skill in learning how to try and split up, like working on smaller bits and looking micro and then going macro and things like that. It's a really interesting kind of problem.
But I think as well, I think you're absolutely right. But I think there's a UX side of things as well. I mean, how do you feel about like a 2-3 page sign up? Does that annoy you? Do you feel like you should sign up on one page?
That's the thing. I suppose the trouble is it all depends on the service, doesn't it? Because, if it is something that is very much like easy, I mean, like, because some of these services you have to sign up and you have to give a lot of information. Now, if it's something you don't really feel like you need a lot of information up front and you can get it after the fact. Like, I mean, let's look at Zencastr for a case, actually. So Zencastr was great. Like, you sign up, you get a free trial, so you have as minimal information as possible. I think you just needed a username, email address, and password. You probably wouldn't even need an username, sorry, because you could probably just use your email address. But the way it works, is that the URLs include that. So those were the things it required. You verify your email address, I think, and then boom, you're in. And then now it's like, oh, my subscription's ended. All right, now what do you actually need from me? Okay, you just need now my credit card details, my card details. Okay, that's all you're getting. So that's all they've got from me, and they've got it in a very seamless experience because they've instantly hooked me in because it was a quick sign up process. It wasn't a couple of pages. It was a simple one page, and you're in. Experience, and you're straight into the interface where you can start playing around and seeing what's going on. And that's perfect for what we're like, which is hackers essentially, and like developers who like tinkering and working out things. I think we spoke about the last episode where we like to experiment ourselves. Whereas some systems may need, and let's say like if I was signing up for a new bank card or something, I probably would want as much information up front as possible. I wouldn't like to be able to just tweak and play around, because I suppose this is again with a volatile system. Like this system, if I break, or like I accidentally record something and I can stop it and delete it, it doesn't really matter. But if I'm playing around in my, my bank website, on my bank website, and I'm just experimenting, trying things out, it's like probably I want as much information up front as possible about how to use these things. So it's I think it's just a different way, and it's working out where you are, I guess, where your product is.
I think, and I just think I think that it's a really good point where you're saying that there's almost like a staggered approach, like, you're taking little bits
if you intervals. Can, I think that's it. Because, I mean, if I signed up for a bank card and I only needed to give like a username, a password, and an email address, it'd be a bit weird. Like, you would expect a bit more of a sign-up process. So I think it's based on your assertions of what you feel like a product should be. And I think nowadays with like products online, like these kind of products like Zencastr, or maybe like what you're doing, you want that quick initial hit, tinker with it, play with a trial, and then they'll investigate and sign up. Because I know I wouldn't have put my credit card my card details in with Zencastr at the beginning without playing with the product first and seeing what it actually offer.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's certain questions that will get people's back up, and I think one of those questions is something like, how did you hear about us? Do you know what I mean? That's like, it's not something that benefits you. And
I think that's
it doesn't take long to do.
Do you ever put the right answers though? Because I mean, like, if I can't look at it, I find like I'm like, I can't find what I did. I just put anything in. Like, it's I think the click through on that's actually right. I don't know.
But. Yeah, and at the same time, but there can be really genuine, good questions that you're like. For us, we have got a page 2, but it's because we want to know what we're just asking the users what's important to them from this product, because it might be they're coming for something that we're not delivering, but we could quite easily give them, and unless we have that data, we're just completely blind to it, which is where I think your company, for example, might be really good with the focus group. I think that idea is brilliant. But I guess if you can get some of that information at sign up, it's also helpful, right? It's as long as you don't wind up your end users, and
I think that's it. It's working out what you can do with your end users and stuff. And if you keep pestering them, I mean, once they're signed up and they're invested and they invest a lot of money, and I think actually I think actually it was really interesting. It was like an Adam Wathan episode like last year, I think. And it was like talking about like kind of these things and talking about like sign up, like, so when like a big company want to invest in a product, they're looking for the fact that can they pay on an annual basis or something like this. Like they're looking at and they probably want upfront, that guy would probably want upfront as much information as possible on your product about what can you do what we want to do, because I've got to go out to my higher ups now and say, yes, we can get this, let's buy this. As opposed to, I need to play around with it. I actually have to, trial it for a bit. Like they probably don't even want to trial in some regard. They just want to know, can you do the product? Can it work? Can we integrate it? Because we haven't got time to do the trial and see if it actually works for us. So again, in that case, the sign up process, and that may be, you may have to go through a person to deal with it, a kind of person that helps you through the process. So yeah, it's a really interesting one actually, like the different types of processes that you see online and in general on how to sign up for something and where your product has to be or what wants to be in that kind of case. But I think, as you say, if you've got a page 2, I mean, it's funny you say like, it's a dreaded page 2, but if it works for your product, then that's okay. And it doesn't stop you from changing it in the future. It really doesn't stop you from saying, okay, actually, how about we delay asking for this information until they've actually visited the site for a bit, and then we pop up a modal or we do something. I don't know, kind of send an email out and stuff. But obviously, maybe that case you won't get as much through rate, many eyes on it. But it's just something to think about.
Well, I think for me, the one thing I said to my client, and I'm not a UX specialist at all, but I just kind of think, well, what would I like? What would annoy me?
I remember you having a white on white design in our previous. It was a white background and it was white text, and it was gonna work. It was huge. Yeah. I mean, this was solid text. That you
it was ahead of its time, wasn't it?
Definitely
ahead of its time.
Yeah, it was too good.
Yeah, in years to come, that will be seen as a trend-setting website.
The white on white.
But no, I think for me, the recommendation I said was like, I think 2 pages are fine, but just make it very clear that there are 2 pages. So having that kind of process, the little steps at the top of the page tells you where you are, then it's really nice and clear. You're not conning anyone or anything like that.
It sounds bad, but maybe that's bad though as well, because if you see a page and you're like, it's 2 steps, really? Can I be bothered to do this? Like what happens? What happens is then people like they do the first page and like, I've invested in this now. All right, so I need this page. All right, then I guess I'll do it. And so it's funny actually, it being honest and then also being a little bit cheeky and saying, well, actually, we just need you to answer this now.
I'd rather be honest. Do you know what I mean? I just think, it's the best way to be.
Buds. You're a nice guy.
I'm neither of those things, but thank you.
Well, you're not honest and you're not nice. Lovely.
Yeah. No, I'm not too bad, I guess. There was some. So last week I plugged the documentary that I'd not watched.
Yes, and
which is very unlike me.
Oh yeah,
right?
It never happens because you're an honest guy.
Because I'm a nice guy and a nice guy. Yeah. But I did watch it, and it's very well worth watching. I do recommend it because I'm a bit of a fanboy when it comes to Johnny Ive. I love the fact that it's just this standard guy, came out of Newcastle Polytechnic, and he's now like head of design at Apple in California. I love that. And but I also, I was bang on about it, but I love that kind of Apple ethos. And he said it as well in this program. He said, what makes great design? And he just said, just caring about every little thing.
That you can't really argue with that, can you?
No. And whilst I am honest and a nice guy, and also, obviously, my code is perfect. I love it, but obviously, I don't always adhere to it. But I just think that's a great
very good ethos to try and I can't think everything is perfect. Like define perfect, it's so subjective on what you feel on that day. But no, I mean that's really good. I'm really glad though that you actually watched it. I'm really glad that you pimped something, you repped it, and it's actually.
It's quite designy rather than developer-y, but if you're into that kind of thing, then I think it's called Brits Who Design the Modern World or something like that. So.
That's very cool, man. Awesome. And actually, on the side, because I know you tweeted about that actually, so on that side, talking about Twitter and stuff, so you'll probably see, audience, if you are on Twitter and you are following 3 Devs Maybe, that we are kind of more active at the moment in tweeting. So I'm trying to make a vested interest and actually try and, tweet out things that we've talked about in the episodes and stuff, and tweet about previous episodes and stuff. Because I realized it was like over a year ago that I spoke to like Dan Admirov about Redux and stuff. I was like, oh, wow, God, that was crazy how long ago. Time has flown. This year has just gone like crazy. So I was just like, on Twitter and stuff. So let me know if it's completely bombarding you and you hate it, or if you do quite like it and it's quite cool. You're like, oh yeah, I remember that episode, and if you want to listen to ones back and stuff. But yeah, audience, let me know how you feel, and also iTunes reviews. How cool would it be, Mickey, if we got some iTunes reviews? Some more ones. If people were really nice and gave us some.
I think just some more from Fraser, just pretending to be other people. That'd be even better. To be honest with you.
Yeah, that's true. Fraser is very good at.
Yeah, he has quite a few kind of alter egos, doesn't he?
Yeah,
but, maybe some genuine iTunes reviews would be good.
Yeah, that would be really cool. And just like feedback and stuff, like contact at 3devsandamaybe.com, like kind of what you want us to hear, what you want to hear about, and things, and like how you. Yeah, what you want us to talk about and who we want on and stuff. And if you want to come on, if you feel that you've got something you want to plug or you want to talk about, an interesting topic, just let us know, because we'd love it. I think. The new year will
definitely would be a good idea.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. And people, who they're like, oh, it'd be really cool if you spoke to this guy about something,
and also maybe if people have any recommendations, purely selfishly here, really good sort of PHP CRMs, and what was your thing? Oh yeah, maybe like their recommendations for any sort of libraries for making good emails, responsive emails as well. Especially would be really cool, and then maybe we could look at a few of those and discuss them on the show. It'd be pretty awesome.
Yes, definitely. All right then, audience. Well, I think it's been another great episode. In my humble opinion, I would not.
This is the best episode.
Definitely, exactly. It just keeps topping each other.
Better and better.
When you try and think about good episodes, I don't. I just think they're all as good as each other. They're all perfect.
They're all absolutely perfect. Yeah.
But audience, it's been another great episode, and we'll speak to you again next week. Goodbye.
Yeah. Cheers. Bye.
You've been listening to 3 Devs and a Maybe. You can contact us at contact@3devsandamaybe.com or follow us on Twitter at 3 Devs and a Maybe.